With that, I want to say again thanks to all of our guests today, and we'll stand for questions. And we're going to go first online for a question.
For Senator Cramer, actually.
Fantastic. Senator Cramer, you're up on deck.
Yes. Simon, Williston Trending Topics. Main Street here in Williston is grateful, but many small oil companies and their employees are hurting. Will Main Street lending reach the energy sector here in the Bakken, and if so, how? And can you offer any words to the thousands of energy sector workers here who are stressing?
So will the Main Street lending program reach the small energy producers in the Williston Basin in the Bakken? It is in many ways designed for them, and it's not exclusive to oil and gas, but the characteristics of the loan match much of the oil and gas sector. I won't go through all the details again of why oil and gas in many cases didn't qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program, although many did. But that just keeps you employed for 8 weeks and paid, but it doesn't necessarily get the business going again. The Paycheck, or the Main Street Lending Program provides an additional form of credit. I might back up, I didn't mention earlier, but a couple of days ago, North Dakota Oil and Gas got a lot of national news when I did a webinar with the North Dakota Petroleum Council with Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, who talked about the forming of some sort of a lending facility, such as he referred to bridge loans. That would be probably the best description of this Main Street lending program, this expanded version. It allows small companies to get some bridge loans. I hesitate to call it benevolent capital because it is for credit-worthy companies, although the qualifications have been loosened so that more people can meet the criteria, and so that is the goal of it. That's not the silver bullet by any stretch, but we want to again build that bridge so the companies, the small companies, can remain in play, so that when the demand and the price comes back up. With regard to what would I say to them, here's what I'd say. This is what I said to Wilbur Ross today. I had a phone call with Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, specific to the possibility of tariffs on Saudi Arabian oil, and we know there's a flotilla of ships, to quote some national media, full of Saudi oil prepared to come into our ports and dump their excess into our refineries, and there are many multinational companies that are willing to accept it. And what I said to Secretary Ross with regard to the possibility of an investigation for dumping, anti-dumping, and the use of 232 authority that the Commander-in-Chief, the President, has under national security auspices to issue tariffs on that oil. What I said to him, and the same thing I've said to the President many times, there are certain things in a nation, a sophisticated nation like ours, that need to be protected for the sake of our national security. One is food. That's why what Doug and I were talking about earlier with regard to the concentration of meat packing is a problem. That vulnerability has been in plain view in recent days and weeks as a result of COVID-19. Another one is pharmaceuticals, and another one, of course, personal protective equipment. We have seen what that vulnerability and that being tied to not just foreign nations, but not very friendly nations, means to that supply chain. I also include energy in that. As I said to Secretary Ross today, what is the point of being able to be energy independent if we aren't willing to demonstrate that independence? We are a net exporter of oil. However, we still import oil. I think there will be a long look after this at what is it that makes America exceptional, what is it about our economy that keeps us safe, and what supply chains deserve greater protection. And I would say to those oil workers, you're on the front line of keeping us secure, because I'd rather use the peaceful tools of energy development than the weapons of war any day to keep Vladimir Putin at bay.
Thank you, Senator. Next question comes from Jack Durr, who's not here today, but this comes in a very high-tech way right here. But thank you, Jack. What are the penalties for not cooperating with contact tracing? The state health officers' confinement orders, if someone tests positive or has had close contact and they receive either a quarantine order or a isolation order, the orders say you must cooperate with health authorities to contact other exposed people to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So it says you must cooperate with, as we've talked about before, violations of health officer guidelines are infractions, up to $1,000 fine. But of course, we haven't had to issue any of those because most individuals, when they find out they're positive, they actually care about all the people that they may have been in contact with. They understand that they may have a disease that may not be deadly to them, but could to others that are vulnerable. And so we've had outstanding collaboration, cooperation, participation from people on identifying as best they can through their memory of who the individuals were that they may have spread this to. And again, I think that's the answer to Jack's question. I believe what's partly driving this, again, we've said the only thing that travels faster than the virus is misinformation, and we've all been about facts, not fear, but it is a fact that on Care19, the contact tracing app, that is a completely voluntary app. It's completely anonymous. You don't have to enter your email, your phone number, your address. It assigns you a 36-digit random ID number. You can delete the data at any time that's in there, and you can delete the entire app at any time. You are not required to share that data if you're contacted by a contact tracer, but it can be an aid for your memory to do that. And again, so it's completely at your discretion whether you release the data. The state health department, the state of North Dakota, does not have that data and is not trying to get that data and does not have access to the data on Care19. And so again, but it will provide you if down the road you've been to a bar, you've been to church, it's next September, and there's people that test positive, and you've been in those locations without knowing who you are, the Care19 app could send you a notification to say you've been someplace where there's been an outbreak and alert you. So again, it's for your safety and other safety, but again, finds, I think, the correct balance between protecting personal privacy, which was a central design point for that application, unlike some others. Those of you that might have Google Maps or anything else on your phone, if you've ever used it to try to go where you want to go, that also uses location services, which everything else, dozens of apps on your phone today are using location services. This does it, but in a much more private way. So again, hopefully that answers Jack's question and what might have been driving it. Now I'm going to go back to questions in the room. I'm going to go Amy and then Jacob.
Ethanol, if the Agriculture Commissioner wouldn't mind.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Amy.
I just have two real quick questions. First of all, do you know off the top of your head the number of ethanol production facilities in North Dakota?
Yes, a number of ethanol facilities in North Dakota. There are 5 of them. There's Richardson, Underwood, Falkirk, I guess we call it. We also have Dakota Spirit, which is just east of Jamestown. And then you have the Hankinson plant and you have the Castleton plant.
And then do you know, or can you just talk a bit about how ethanol production has changed during the course of the pandemic? And I don't know if you even have any figures as to how much it's decreased here.
Well, I may not be the expert on it, so bear with me. Probably some of the greatest things that have happened to the industry itself is when we started to see the breakdown in energy prices, and certainly crude oil is a driving factor in the cost of gasoline. And when we saw less traveling across this nation, we saw less energy use. We all of a sudden saw the price of gasoline and crude oil come down. And then when we saw the little mishap here recently, when you had traders that were sitting on contracts, and we got to the end of the month and those contracts had to convert, they physically could not take possession of that contract or what's in that contract, which a small contract on crude oil would be 10,000 barrels, 42,000 gallons. They had to pay to get out of them because they couldn't take it physically, so that sent it underneath. That even drove the market down more. And what happened was A bushel of corn will produce about 2.8 gallons, 2.7 gallons of ethanol. And when you see ethanol selling for 89 cents, and you have operating costs, you have the cost of production weighed into that, all of a sudden you are not even getting close to breaking even. And that has caused some turmoil. The other thing that happened in all this, 40% of our ethanol facilities in the nation shut down. So we saw distiller grains, which was a primary feed source being utilized in the livestock industry, started to get pulled from different areas. That started to send the price up dramatically, in some cases 300%, which really caused a bigger hardship for our livestock producers, especially the ones locally, because our plants were still open. That stuff was being shipped out. Now you would think with that equation, well, ethanol companies may be doing well. Not necessarily true, because when they were sending modified or a wet distiller grain out the door, they had very little cost in it. Now they actually had to dry it down. They had more energy cost into it before they could send it down the rail to those customers that were willing to pay significantly more for it. Yes, sir, Jacob.
Any concerns, or I guess where would North Dakota's ethanol industry be without the recovery plan?
I think they'd be struggling. Hankinson right now, as I understand currently, has shut in for just a brief period of time. I think they're assessing their situation. A couple other facilities have actually, I believe they are running at 80 or 90% capacity. They're trying to just keep their legs underneath them, buy a little time. But I would probably go on the flip side of that question: what would happen to the ag industry without our ethanol industry and without this program? Right now, I would tell you as a corn farmer, I believe it puts somewhere between 50 and 70 cents a bushel on every price of corn, on every bushel of corn, because we have ethanol in our backyard. I remember raising corn when we didn't have ethanol, and our basis was extremely high, and we didn't even produce that much. So since ethanol has been here, it has put a floor added stability for the farmer.
For some context, motor fuel demand is about 50% of what it was here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that they're saying gasoline consumption now has reached levels that are approaching the 1960s, which is just hard to comprehend because of the population of our country versus the 1960s, the number of cars, number of planes, the number of everything. It's just really hard to, again, this will be a economic case study that'll be taught for 100 years is going to be March and April of 2020. I also want to say on ethanol, to give a shout out, I'm not sure if all 5 are doing it, but I know Thoroldson in Castleton is one of the North Dakota businesses that's stood up and switched their business model a little bit. And I know they're producing hand sanitizer, because of course hand sanitizer is mostly alcohol and ethanol. An ethanol plant is like some of the world's largest stills. It's like it's what it is. I mean, they're making alcohol, turning in creating alcohol for aka ethanol. So that's great. Other questions before we wrap up? Dave?
Senator Cramer. I'm just curious if, because of the demand for the first Paycheck Protection Program, and it looks like the demand is still very strong for the second one, is there going to be a third one and maybe other incentives as well?
So the question is, is there going to be a third tranche of paycheck protection? I think right now most members are in a discovery mode, if you will. The Senate's going back into session Monday. We'll have votes Monday night, and we'll be there next week. One of the main points of discussion beyond doing some legislating, mostly in the area of confirming presidential appointments, will be exactly what's next. What will a COVID-19 recovery phase 4 look like? A lot of that will be determined by how well the first 3.5 tranches go. Paycheck protection was, is and probably will always be one of the most or the most popular component because it's doing what it's designed to do. Again, I real credit to the lenders in North Dakota for distributing it so well and for understanding the rules so well and being out ahead of the game. And that's a real tribute to them and to our small business community. But, you know, the biggest challenge now with the Paycheck Protection Program isn't even going to be running out of money in the second tranche. It's running out of weeks because it only pays for 8 weeks. And so, you know, there's a little disconnect with the unemployment insurance dates, which run through July 31st. Paycheck Protection runs out on June 30th. But it does give us an opportunity to see how it's all going, seeing how the programs are working, seeing what the needs are going forward. There will be 2 very high priorities, I think, in the discussions for the next round of assistance. One is near and dear to the governor's heart, more near and dear to other governors than to ours probably, and that is, of course, assistance directly for states and local communities. In the first round of the CARES Act, there was a pretty generous distribution of funds directly to states. However, it was pretty confined. It was restricted to COVID-19 costs only. And the minimum for a state was $1.25 billion, and that's what North Dakota gets or would have gotten or received. And then recently, the Treasury Department released some of the rules, relieved them a little bit because the unemployment insurance piece was so high and such a burden on states that it seemed appropriate that money could be used for state reimbursement for their costs. And I think that was adequate. It was a good call. I think we advocated heavily for it. In the next round, however, there are many states, not all states are created equal. Not all states get to be North Dakota. And so the demand for more generous federal funding to not only cover the cost of COVID-19, but also replace lost revenue as a result maybe of the downturn in the economy, maybe as a result of COVID-19, and other ills that states might be going through, whether it's recently or less recently, is the debate of the day. And we'll be watching that closely because that's a high priority for Democratic members of the Congress. For Republican members of the Congress, a very high priority is relief of liability for small business, medium-sized business, large business, entire industries, local governments, healthcare workers, because with this rapid development, with the rapid distribution of trillions of dollars have come the ambulance chasers looking for opportunities to cash in and finding clients that they can service, whether the client knows it or not. And so we will be looking very closely as Republicans at liability reforms and making sure that we don't create a more litigious society, but rather a loving society, Governor, and one that understands that where we all understand that all of us from the poorest among us to the richest among us to the bureaucrat among us, and that includes even politicians, some empathy even for politicians, that we would be looking to give each other some grace, not to sue each other. So those are going to be really high priorities going into it, Dave. But remembering too that a lot of the CARES Act dollars, they're just getting implemented. The Paycheck Protection Program is very fast. Unemployment insurance was very fast. It didn't seem very fast if you needed your money today, but as government goes, it was warp speed. Same with the distribution of the stimulus checks or direct deposits. But the other bigger programs that are leveraging credit facilities and things like that designed to keep the economy at least humming, those are just getting kicked off, and we'll see how effectively those are. And then see, of course, how getting the economy back going plays out.
Senator, if I may, since you mentioned that those federal dollars are just now being implemented recently, in this letter that you and some of your colleagues sent to Secretary Mnuchin and Chairman Powell, you said that larger banks, quote, continue to use their market dominance to financially discriminate against legal and compliant businesses for political reasons. Wondering what evidence you have to support that.
Okay, everybody get yourself some popcorn and pop. I'm about to entertain you. There's lots of evidence, and it's cited in most of their policy statements that the banks have. It's cited in their annual reports. in the responses to pressure that they receive from institutional investors. So let's start with BlackRock. BlackRock is the bank, the investment firm that is assigned to the CARES Act. They are the main advisor, really the facilitator of the CARES Act. BlackRock has a very strong policy against investing in fossil fuels. It was, when I brought that to the president's attention, he was a little surprised by it. But Chairman Powell assured me just this week that BlackRock's corporate policies will not influence the CARES Act or the Federal Reserve, that industry neutrality, as long as the industry is a legal, compliant industry, like, say, the firearms industry, coal industry, the oil and gas industry. But J.P. Morgan Chase has announced that their objection to investing in several fossil fuels. Wells Fargo has. Just this last week, there was an announcement by one of them, and I'm forgetting which one. It might have been J.P. Morgan. I'm not sure, but they announced that they would not invest in anything in the Arctic. The Arctic is often where their bias begins, because the Arctic sounds romantic enough from afar that that they can sort of get by with that. So no, it's widespread, well known, and they're not bashful about announcing it.
Okay, maybe a couple more questions. We'll go Lane, and then we'll go online for a couple, and then we'll call it a day. Lane?
Governor, in reference to the locations picked for field hospitals, first, is the Fargo Dome still set up, and for how long, if so?
To my knowledge, the what I call the rehearsal staging that was set up both here in Bismarck and in Fargo Dome, that those cots are still there. And that was, again, work in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers that was tasked with building field hospitals around the country. We have no model and no projection and no evidence that would suggest that we would ever need to have anybody set in there, but those cots are still there.
Secondly,
and so how long it'll be there, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'd say as long as necessary. Fargo Dome is one of the things we talked about yesterday that's not eligible to be holding large events right now. So it's no conflict. And of course, that's a facility owned by the city of Fargo, and the city of Fargo has been a great collaborator through all this. But I'm sure that what we have in there could be moved out faster than they can get the AstroTurf up after a football game. So I don't think it's going to slow anything down.
and Governor, if I can.
Sure.
With those locations, are they going to go on the same guidelines as all other large venues, or are they going to be kind of held separately since they are those selected for potential field hospitals?
I don't think there'll be any conflict, but good question, Lane, on that one. We haven't thought that through about the ones where we've got pre-staged some equipment, but I think they'll all be on the same timetable. I mean, if we're back up opening up large events, I think that means that we've cleared any potential or even far-reaching possibility, or small percentage possibility of ever needing those minimal care facilities in those large event arenas. Okay, online.
Mike Smith, 660 KUYZ in Williston. Has the state completed testing in every long-term care facility at this time? And if not, how many have been done and how many are left to be tested?
The answer, the first one is no. I don't have the exact stats on how many we've done and how many have remained, but I know that we've got a goal that by the end of the first week in May that we will get through all of them, at least on the first round. Because places where we have counties in North Dakota, as you know, that have long-term care facilities. We have counties that have not have any active positives. We have other places where we've got long-term care facilities. I think we were at 27 yesterday, where either a staff member, 27 out of 218 long-term care facilities have either a staff or a resident that has tested positive, and our focus really is on all of those right now. And what Chris Jones is up here talking about is making sure that if we get a positive in a long-term care facility, that we are within 24 hours making sure that we got appropriate isolation to protect the staff of the long-term care facility and all the folks that are, if you have 1 out of 100 that's positive, we want to protect the other 99. It's about risk management, and we've got the capacity and the resources to do that. But I think I'm not sure if we're releasing that data, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But good question, thank you. By May 9th is the goal to complete all the testing. And again, you know, I'd say that's a goal. Maybe I'll challenge the team. Maybe we can even beat it if we can get our testing capacity to keep moving up. Another question from online.
April Baumgarten, the former Fargo Moorhead. Governor Burgum, when do you plan to go to a restaurant for dine-in after restrictions are lifted tomorrow, and which restaurant will you choose to go to first?
So April, I don't know how many days we're on here where we've been at the Capitol for 40 plus days in a row. So there's a lot of places I've thought about going, and a restaurant wasn't one of them. But I want to say, so I don't have any plans right now to do that. But I'm happy that we're getting people back able to do that, and appreciate the question. But it gives me and part of it, I guess I hadn't thought about it, so it'll give me something to think about tonight or tomorrow. I say maybe I should go out for breakfast at the little cafe at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning or something here in Bismarck. I don't know. It'll be Jacob.
4 days, but who's counting?
Okay.
I have a question for the senator again, please. Senator, some of your Democratic colleagues have been calling for another round of these stimulus checks, and this time boosting it to $2,000. Wondering if that's something that's needed or something you'd support.
Well, again, Jacob, what I would say is we need to see what the situation is after we see how the first $3 trillion worth of stimulus and investment goes. And the $3 trillion is only the appropriated amount. The balance sheet, or the Federal Reserve's gone from about $4 trillion to $13 trillion before the CARES Act. And so there's a lot of liquidity out there. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. I would say of all of the things that there could be in the next round, direct stimulus to families is probably one of the more politically popular ones. It's interesting because the initial stimulus checks went to people at a time when they certainly needed the money but couldn't go anywhere to spend it. Now that the economy's opening up, not just here where it's always been open, Governor, thank you very much, but in places where it's been much more locked down for obvious reasons and for good reasons, it'll be interesting to see actually how people's spending habits, what restaurants they're going to go to, whether they even go to the restaurants, whether they'll wait and see how their neighbor does before they go. All of these things, we'll have to see how it plays out to determine whether there would be a demand for something like that or not. But politically speaking, it is always popular. I think presidents as well as members of Congress, don't mind doing something like that if, in fact, it would, quote, stimulate the economy. But right now, the economy doesn't necessarily need stimulation as much as it needs healing so that the free market can actually work.
If I may quickly,
sure.
Because this is now tomorrow it'll be the second time that rent is due under many states being shut down. Is there at least a sense of urgency behind getting this program formed?
Yeah, I don't know that the calendar is going to determine that necessarily. I do think it's opportune that we're going back into session now because while it's been good practice probably to stay away when you're part of a body of 100 people who come from 50 different states, and your routine is to go home and come back every week. We're kind of a bad petri dish, but it is important now. It's time now for us to get back to work like our frontline workers are, and look at all that and see whether there's a sense of urgency or not. A lot of it will be, like most things, there'll be some anecdotes, but there'll largely be decisions based on data, and we'll see what the data shows in terms of what the need is and then what the supply would be.
Okay, we're going to call that a wrap. I want to thank Lindsay for, I don't know if any of you have signed for an hour and 25 minutes straight, but she's got great stamina. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, all the media that's here. Thanks for the online questions. We'll see you tomorrow at 3:30, and as we head into May Day and the reopening of those businesses under the new North Dakota Smart guidelines, again, I would say to all the customers, be North Dakota Smart yourself, and of course, and then drive safe, enjoy the beautiful weather, and thanks for being here together. Thanks to Senator Cramer, thanks Commissioner Goring, thanks Chris Jones for being part of the program today. Take care, North Dakota.